Before I proceed with the actual content of this video, I want to just do a little bit of housekeeping. First and foremost, I want to express my great gratitude to the individuals that stepped up to the plate and either became patrons or donated to me via PayPal. You have my enormous gratitude and appreciation for that, and it definitely makes the job of running the channel a bit easier mentally, at least. And yeah, words don't do justice to such things, because when somebody volunteers effectively his time, which is money, to you, it's hard to really reciprocate that, no matter what the work you produce might be or how it's viewed. So thank you for your generosity. I appreciate that. The Raging Golden Ego video, which was linked to me and I checked out, seemed to indicate that there is a way of maneuvering about this demonization process, which involves effectively uploading videos in advance and then waiting for their publication. I would imagine you would set it on private and then wait a while, and you could sort of get around the system that way. That is not a bad idea necessarily, but in my case, I'm kind of on the clock at the moment, because I've been in the process of looking for a new place for a while now, but much more intensely in the last few weeks. There have been numerous obstacles there. A term I've come up with is, I'm not a Prussian cubicle office worker drone, so that's the biggest obstacle, but that's neither here nor there. And so the stability of my living situation is not known, and because of that, for the time being, I would choose not to do the forestalling process and just sort of wait. And with that said, I'm reasonably certain, because of the nature of the topics I will address in this video, that it will be demonetized. Not because of the title, but because of words that will be employed. And of course, not because of anything I endorse, but merely the presence of certain things. So, housekeeping effectively done. Everyone, thank you for, once again, your generosity and your participation, and onwards to the actual video content. In the wake of my discussion with Reactionary Expat on the topic of the managerial class, this sort of soulless group of elites that seems to run the show, there were several interesting comments. And one of the interesting comments, reflecting Paradox Games, was left by one Avenger 93, and it's a bit eye-opening, and I think it's suggestive of certain things, and this is where I'm almost certain the video will be demonetized, because I have to read off comments that will have trigger words, hey. But I will accept that for now. Quote, on the topic of Paradox Games, I always found it supremely ironic that the easiest way to win was always to play as a full-blown fascist nationalist ethno-state that regards everyone else as subhuman and wipe everyone out who opposes you, especially in their latest offering, Stellaris, doing a 40k LOM playthrough. I'm not sure what the LOM stands for, but anyway, where you full-blown genocide entire species from the galaxy is the best way to avoid all the problems that a multicultural empire will have to face, both in going to war to defend themselves, because how dare you wage total war against another sentient species, even if they are aggressive, and in assimilating populations with wildly divergent ethics and environmental preferences. It's also the easiest and best way to keep the populace at home happy, because you create a civilization fueled by species pride and a manifest destiny mentality that permits little dissent, if any. If these managerial classes are indeed grand strategy players, then they never played a grand strategy game ever. By the way, he should have used the present perfect there. Then they have never played, but neither here nor there, ever. Otherwise, we would have a lot more Third Reichs all over the place, end quote. So I think it's a reasonably insightful comment, and it's accurate and inaccurate on several levels. I cannot really address the meat and drink of this video without addressing the 20th century, which, as you can see in the title, I call the century of forlorn dreams. The 20th century has been, looking back upon the course of humanity, by far the most remarkable and destructive century we have witnessed as a species. So much was invented, and so much was accomplished, both positive and negative. A great many things happened during the 20th century. And attached to these great many things were a series of ideological thought waves that fueled much of what had come to pass in the previous century. And as reactionary expat has pointed out, and I have pointed out, and I'm in agreement with them on this, these were effectively failed utopian experiments. In theory, Avenger 93 is correct that if you were to execute a game plan in a manner similar to as this paradigm described in Paradox Games, Stellaris. By the way, Stellaris is I've never played it, but it's a space-oriented game, and as you play a species that goes about colonizing and killing and what have you, or not, as it were. If you run something like that, in theory, yes, it might be the best way of doing certain things. Now, I say in theory because effectively that had been tried during the 20th century, varying degrees. All across the globe, there were utopian efforts at creating various forms of society that were believed to be better or would be better if X came to pass. And X actually never came to pass. Instead, you ended up with the dystopian nightmares given breath and life that we can bear witness to. The trails and piles of corpses, the mass killings, murders across the globe, most continents, Europe, Asia. Basically, in the 20th century, we bore witness to just the failure of the utopian, the failure of these dreams. And many of these dreams were not too dissimilar to the situation described by Avenger 93 in the comment, because it was tried, it was attempted, whether for political reasons or ethnic reasons or a combination thereof, to wipe the floor clean of certain people. And it didn't work out. Now you can speculate, but if it had worked out and yada, 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 it didn't. And I think just because of the nature of reality itself, the society and civilizations across the globe, there will be natural opposition to that. Most people won't stand by and let certain things happen if they feel it's not in their best interest to do so. So in the mass killings in Indonesia in 1965, which it's estimated about 1 million people died or were murdered, most people didn't have a vested interest in halting that, so nothing really happened. And the people died, and there have been various mass graves discovered. And the reasons for the killings are various. I'm going to be making a video eventually on the topic. Not specifically Indonesia, although I will make heavy mention of that, but most of the reasons were pseudo-political reasons. There was some ethnic cleansing as well with the Hakka Chinese Chinese ethnic minority in Indonesia. But the point I'm trying to illustrate here is that, okay, yes, you can do that, but it's rare that you're not going to get opposition. I think in Europe, there were many opposing sides involved during World War II. And effectively, these projects, these utopian projects, were attempted with violence, and they failed. They failed rather miserably, ultimately. And yes, once again, everyone's, well, if only X hadn't intervened or happened. They didn't work out. I think they didn't work out because most people who see their interests as being oppositional or even non-aligned will not countenance a program of the sort suggested in the comment in Stellaris or a paradox game. In theory, yes, that is the most streamlined process. And this leads to the next big soundbite of the video, and that is the tacit acceptance of the 20th century as a century of forlorn dreams, of crushed hopes, of failure on many fronts, and perhaps the most important fronts, because the 20th century has left humanity, and specifically Europe, and I'll get into that in a bit, in a state of despair. The lack of, taken from the French, the lack of hope. And many of you might have heard of this author. There's a French author, a female author, Chantal Dessol, who has written quite a bit. One piece of literature she's written, well, it's a series of essays, The Icarus Fallen, the English title is The Search for Meaning in an Uncertain World. If I recall right, it was published in the late 90s, so interesting time period. And the issue here, and what she argues, is that effectively, if you look at man in the 20th century, she really focused on Europe, but I would argue that this happened across the globe, as I said. If you look at man in the 20th century, Europe specifically, what you get is an Icarus that soared too high. He got too close to the sun. But instead of perishing to his death and paying the price for his hubris, he somehow survived. This is a point that Douglas Murray has brought up as well. He survived, and his wings are singed and tattered, and he can no longer fly. And here we could look at flight, the metaphor of soaring high into the heavens, the imperial realm, as the desire to achieve dreams, the desire to think above and beyond the mundanity that life has to offer. And what is left after that? After your attempt to reach for the imperial realm has failed, but you survive, well, you're kind of left in effectively a type of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, pyramid of needs, where all the things that would be placed at the upper end of the pyramid in terms of absolute wants and needs are no longer achievable, at least on a macro scale, in terms of society-wide visions and things to be striven for. And you're just left with the baseline needs, food, shelter, and basic interpersonal relationships, and so on and so forth. Only that these baseline needs at the bottom of the pyramid take on a hyperbolic and exaggerated form. I mean, look at the need to have interpersonal relationships with people. This is amplified then by technology and smartphones and me phones and not so smartphones and all this stuff. Facebook allows us to interact and sort of amplify these things. But notice the absence in the 21st century, and this is why I believe it's a tacit acknowledgement of the failures of the 20th century, the absence of some grand vision that is accompanied by the force to back it up. Now, there are people still arguing for grand visions. You could say the attempt at multiculturalism is a type of grand vision. But no one in his right mind, even if he wishes it to be the case or would want to implement this, no one in his right mind, managerial class or otherwise, would attempt to take up the mantle of the 20th century and effectively go to war with people, engage in mass cullings and annihilation and destruction of property and human life. And it's been done. It's been tried, and it generally has been found wanting by most people. By most people. And this is why I think that the analysis is not quite perfect on the part of Avenger 93, because the managerial class, they're obviously smart, whatever you might think of them, they recognize that. They recognize that if they were to do the most effective paradox game campaign style, or implement that style or approach, that they would fail because that had been attempted. And so they have to go about these things in a roundabout way, if they have a vision at all. And it really is anyone's guess exactly what they're thinking. They cannot engage in the direct method, because the 20th century bears witness to the failure of that method across the globe. And as the author Chantal Dessol indicates, there's nothing to grasp for anymore. Most of us are Icarus with our wings singed, tarred and tattered. And this is why you have someone like Jordan Peterson, who wrote a book, Maps of Meaning. People across the world, but specifically in Europe, Europe of all places, has gone through hell on Earth. Not just in the 20th century. Centuries and centuries and centuries of internecine warfare, mutual destruction, some of it economically motivated, some of it ethnically motivated, some of it politically motivated. Much of it a mishmash of the entirety of that. And if anyone is going to be weary of the world and utopian dreams and violence and all these things, it would have to be Europeans, more so than other people, I'd argue. But this applies, I think, almost in equal measure to other places. It's not that ideology doesn't exist anymore, it's just that the teeth that might have been gnashed in an attempt to affect the ideology upon a group of people, it's just not there anymore. It's done in much more subtle ways, of course. I think YouTube is a good example of that. Internet culture in general, academia, in all these places, it's subtle because nobody wants to get their hands dirty anymore. It's seen as a failure, and I think it was and it historically is a failure to do that. So you have to go about it in roundabout ways. In some sense, it's admirable what a person like Jordan Peterson is doing, because he's trying to sort of give meaning and hope to people. This is a complicated issue, obviously, because, as I said, we've been reduced to the bottom-most elements of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I probably should go into a bit more detail on that. I mean, the hierarchy, Maslow, a psychologist, hypothesizes hierarchy of needs, which is widely accepted as reasonably accurate. At the bottommost part of the pyramid, you have these basic needs, most basic being food, water, warmth, sleep, rest. Then just above that, you have safety needs, security, safety, protection from harm. And then you start getting these psychological needs, intimate relationships, friends. Then above that, there's the need of accomplishment, needs of esteem, and then finally self-actualization. Now, I'd argue that on a macro scale, the last two categories, esteem needs, the need for accomplishment and the self-actualization, these have disappeared from most of the macro scale. I mean, there are individuals still striving for certain things. But the average person, the average man or woman, is really trapped in the three bottommost needs. And they're just expanded upon. So once again, I'll say security and safety. Well, it's not enough just to have a flat. You need to have a 300-meter house with a fence outside and maybe guard dogs. I mean, this is obviously hyperbolic, but it's an example of what I mean. More is better. It's not enough just to have your needs of food and water and warmth met. You need a special water mattress or a special type of mattress bed. You need to get the sushi at the elite sushi bar. And you can't just drink tap water. You got to drink the best bottled water out there. free-flowing from the Swiss Alps or whatever. And as I said, in terms of intimate relationships, I mean, that's just sort of expanded upon, your ways of connecting with people. But the rest of there's rhetoric about trying to accomplish things, but in terms of just society at large, I just don't think anyone was really doing it the way they tried to in the 20th century. The hopelessness and despair, the forlorn state of affairs is just too great. We're done with that, I think, for the foreseeable future. Now, I'm not excluding the possibility that some grand vision might, in fact, come into being in the future. It could happen. It would have to be accompanied by something that's actionable, though, and viewed as reasonable both by the managerial class, who would, I guess, assist in implementing this, as well as the public, who would have to effectively consent on some level. The paradox vision just isn't going to happen, because, as I said, it was attempted to various degrees, and it did not work out particularly well. Just more utopian visions. And I think despite thoughtful individuals suffering from that lack of overarching meaning, which, I think it should be obvious, is implied and inherent to the universe itself, neither here nor there, separate discussion, I think that there are a lot of people content with those baseline needs, just going about their day, wandering the maze of human relationships and expanding the patio of their home and getting that vegan sushi roll or whatever, in which case it wouldn't be sushi anymore. More like Korean kimbap, but hey. This is, I think a lot of people are content with that. The next big film, the next big video game release. The time of dreams is done. Now, as a final note, I will offer a potential vision, but it's not one that a lot of people will like. And it's one that I adhere to, because I think it's the only possibility of superseding inherent limitations to human in being human. This is some transhumanist vision. I don't know what form it will take exactly. Genetic modification would be part of it. AI would be part of it. And there are a lot of problems with these things, potential problems. But if there ever is this kind of grand vision, it might, or I think it would be accompanied by these types of developments that simply weren't possible in the 20th century. Remember in my video, The Problem of Philosophical Course Correction, which, by the way, was demonetized, I guess because I had MGTOW in the title. The issue there I presented is that without actually changing what we are, we will always be stuck on the ground effectively. And all we can do is engage in mental masturbation and philosophical musings on things. And I think that's the key issue that we will face. When will enough be enough in terms of recycling the various aspects of those three bottommost needs in the hierarchy of needs? Anyway, not a cheerful video, obviously, but I'm not known for cheer. But I think that comment was insightful and missed the mark slightly as well. And so I read that off because it's related to this. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. And once again, my great and many thanks to the people that have donated and supported the channel in light of the Terminator bot hunting me down. You take care and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.